Ven Señor Jesús, Maranatha. Ven Señor Jesús, Maranatha. Ven Señor Jesús, Maranatha. Si ven pronto, Maranatha.
So this is the Holy Gospel according to Luke, chapter 21. This was this last Sunday's reading, in other words, the reading for the first Sunday of Advent in the traditional Latin Mass. And my suspicion it was also the reading in the Novus Ordo. Okay, the sequel of the Holy Gospel according to Luke. At that time, Jesus said to his disciples, "There shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations by reason of the confusion of the roaring of the sea and of the waves, men withering away for fear and expectation of what shall come upon the whole world, for the powers of the heaven shall be moved. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with great power and majesty. But when these things begin to come to pass, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is at hand." And he spoke to them a similitude. "See the fig tree and all the trees. When they now shoot forth their fruit, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you shall see these things come to pass, know that the kingdom of God is at hand. Amen, I say to you, this generation shall not pass away till all things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away." Yes, this world will end. Yes, Jesus will return. He will somehow come down back from heaven in a way that is seen throughout the world, that clearly identifies him, and then there'll be the end of the world. Will there be any time between the return of Jesus and the end of the world? The answer to that is there's no dogma that answers that question. So there's a range of opinion, theological opinion, which is all acceptable. None of it is heresy. There is the rapture is heresy, by the way, but the belief that there will be a 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth is acceptable. It's not heretical. And the belief that the return of Christ will be immediately followed by the general judgment and the end of the world is also acceptable and not heretical. And obviously they're very contradictory, but the church has not defined much about the end times, and it did not define that. If you think, as I do, and I think it's the majority opinion, that the return of Christ will be immediately followed by the end of the world and the general judgment, then you are left to ponder what the 1,000-year reign of Christ means. I believe that's in Revelation. And good luck pondering it. I'll tell you the answer that my spiritual director suggested to me that I think is a pretty good answer. Some saints believe that the 1,000-year reign of peace was basically the 1,000 years of Christendom, the 1,000 years when it was the Holy Roman Empire, I guess you'd say from about 800 to 1800, where Christianity ruled the governments of the Western world. But we think of chauvinistically as the civilized world, but was essentially under Christianity, and in that sense under the reign of Christ, for about 1,000 years, give or take. So that's one possible explanation of what that 1,000-year reign of Christ could refer to. I'm not saying that's what, that is the official answer. I'm just saying that's one way out of the problem. Now, there's another aspect to this which I really like. In another passage in Matthew, Jesus says, "No man knows the day and the hour. Even only the Father in heaven knows the day and the hour. The Son of Man doesn't even know the day and the hour." When they ask him, when is this going to happen? So that's often cited as saying, Don't try to guess when the second coming is going to happen, because Jesus himself said, no man knows the day or the hour. Have any of you heard that? Okay, well, the problem with saying, oh, we're not supposed to guess at when it's going to happen, no man knows the day and the hour, even Jesus doesn't know the day and the hour, is he contradicts himself. And he doesn't contradict himself, he clarifies. Because look at what he says here, and he also says in Matthew, he says, see the fig tree and all the trees, when they shoot forth their fruit, you know that summer is nigh. So you also, when you see all these things come to pass, know that the kingdom of God is at hand. In other words, when you see what he's telling you is going to precede the second coming, he is telling you that the second coming is near. In other words, when you see that stuff, you know the second coming is near. And what are they? In Luke, those things are signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, upon the earth distress of nations by the confusion of the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting away with fear, and for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And in Matthew 24, which is the preceding week, they give more details, and he says, the disciples asked Jesus, when will this be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the close of the age? Second coming. And Jesus answered them, take heed that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. I think you could argue, there are an awful lot of visionaries nowadays, and there have been an awful lot of false visionaries. I'm thinking of the little pebble in Australia. I don't want to offend anybody, because maybe you have your own favorite among the false visionaries and buy into them. But there have been an awful lot since 1970s or so, and a number of them have been pretty strongly debunked. But anyway, take heed that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All this is but the beginning of the sufferings. Now, we do have wars all over the globe. We have lots of wars all over the globe. We have wars in Africa. We have wars, of course, in Eastern Europe. We have wars in the Middle East. And we'll probably have a war in South America pretty soon. A nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places, and this is all but the beginning of the sufferings. Now, I personally think, we used to have global warming. We don't have global warming anymore. Now we have climate change. There was change to climate change. It is true. We have more hurricanes than we usually used to have. We have more earthquakes. We have more, I don't know about forest fires. We have more tsunamis, more tidal waves, and so forth. Now, maybe that's man-made climate change, or maybe that is the disorder in nature that Jesus prophesies to precede the second coming. Famines and earthquakes, many false prophets will arise and lead many astray, and because wickedness is multiplied, most men's love will grow cold. I think we're seeing that. All you have to do is look at nursing homes and the fact that most old people die alone, sitting in a chair waiting for somebody to visit them, instead of in the bosom of love of their family. Mothers are slaughtering their children by the millions. Marriages are not maintained. In other words, I don't know what the percentage of marriages are that don't end before the death of one of the spouses. The percentage of children who are raised by both natural parents, I think in the United States, is maybe 20%, 30% at best. There are a lot of evidences that man's love has grown cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Now, this is confirmed as dogma that before the second coming, the gospel has to be preached throughout the world to the four ends of the earth. That's in the Catechism of the Council of Trent. I would argue that with technology, with radio and then television and then the internet and satellite radio and so forth, we are pretty much at that point where there's no place left on earth that hasn't had the chance to hear the gospel. Next, Next apocalyptic sign. So when you see the desolating sacrilege spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let him who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. Let him who is in the field not turn back and take his mantle. For there will then be such great tribulation, such has not been seen from the beginning of the world until now, and never will be. Okay, the abomination of desolation sitting in the holy place. I can tell you that some people, some Catholics, have associated that with the events in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church over the last 60 or so years. Take your pick, what they might have been associating that with, or it might be something else. Desolating sacrilege. Certainly, if there was no more holy sacrifice of the Mass, no more valid holy sacrifice of the Mass, but a counterfeit version, God forbid, one that actually was a satanic sacrifice, or one that was simply a mockery and empty, that would certainly qualify as a desolating sacrilege standing in the holy place. I'm not saying I think that. If those days had not been shortened, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. That certainly suggests a tremendous falling away from the faith. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give forth its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Okay? From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. So that's the part that people like to quote, saying don't try to predict where we are in this timeline, because Jesus said not even he knows. But he says that right after saying learn the lesson from the fig tree, okay? So it's a little hypocritical to only say verse 36 and to skip verse 35 or 34 or 32. It starts at 32 where he talks about the fig tree. Let's see. Now, there's a very difficult line here, which is, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Now there's no question that you have to wrestle with what that means. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away. There are at least three common resolutions to that problem, which, by the way, is not a problem. I mean, it's a mystery, but it doesn't mean the stuff isn't going to happen, okay? It adds a little element of puzzlement. One interpretation, which is a very common interpretation, is that another translation of the underlying word for generation is race. And therefore, some translations, including, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the King James, but I'm not sure, this race won't pass away. And the interpretation is that he's talking about Jews and Judaism. And because this entire talk is on Dominus Flevit, looking over the Temple Mount. And he's talking about the destruction of the temple and the fall of Judaism, essentially, with the destruction of the temple. So that's what starts this whole conversation. So some people think that this generation will not pass away is really this race will not pass away, because he's looking He's looking at the temple in Jerusalem. He's looking at the heart of Judaism and the Jews. He is saying, you're going to be destroyed. Not one stone is going to be left on the other of the temple. And yet this race will not pass away. In other words, there will be Jews around until the end of the world. There's a reason this is the most common explanation out of the problem, because it's a pretty good one, because this comes right after Jesus is preaching in the temple. This is Holy Week, and he's giving his woe to you scribes and Pharisees. Woe to you scribes and Pharisees. Woe to you scribes and Pharisees. You know, what prophet didn't you kill? What priest didn't you kill on the way to the altar, and so forth. And then, okay, this is that afternoon. And then at the end of that afternoon, he leaves with his disciples to go back to Bethany. And they climb the Mount of Olives, and they're a little ways up the Mount of Olives. And they're sitting down, and the disciples point out the temple building, the temple in Jerusalem. And Jesus answers, you see all of them, don't you? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So he, in the context of having just excoriated, the Jewish leaders, says, oh, you're impressed by this temple you're seeing across the valley? Well, I tell you, there won't be two stones left on each other. And then he goes into his prediction of the fall of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and the fall of Jerusalem. So it makes sense that when he says this generation won't pass away, maybe it is this race won't pass away, because the context, the shell, this is a story within a story. The outer story is the infidelity of the Jews and the crucifixion about to happen, and the subsequent destruction of the temple and destruction of Jerusalem, huge slaughter of Jerusalem, by the way, and exile of the Jews. And that is the kernel, that's the inner, the inner circle. The inner sphere is the destruction of Jerusalem and the failure, in some sense, of Judaism, and what's going to happen to Jerusalem, because he's talking about the temple. And then he immediately goes into a description of the second coming. And there's actually no clear delineation, no clear line between his description of the destruction of Jerusalem and his description of the end of the world. One flows into the other, okay? Which is actually, no matter how you look at it, that's the answer to this generation won't pass away. Because at that point, you have two choices. Perhaps this generation won't pass away refers to this race won't pass away, and he's talking about, nonetheless, Judaism and the Jews will survive until the second coming, which we know as dogma, by the way. Or what he's doing is he is using the timeline of the inner sphere, and then he's describing the outer sphere, and then he's wrapping up with a conclusion that's kind of back in the inner sphere, which is this generation won't pass away. Because that physical generation, in other words, the people who are alive there, did not pass away until Jerusalem was destroyed and the temple was torn down. So perhaps he's kind of flitting between the inner sphere of the temple destruction, the outer sphere of the end of the world, and then when he ends, he's back on the inner sphere of the temple destruction. So that's it. But it was the gospel reading for the last 2 weeks.
Ven Señor Jesús, Maranatha. Ven Señor Jesús, Maranatha. Ven Señor Jesús, Maranatha. Si ven pronto,